Thomas Reeves had lived in his modest ranch-style home for 15 years. The property sat on the edge of the upscale Oakwood Estates community, but his land technically belonged to the adjacent, more rural district. When he inherited an additional acre of undeveloped land from his uncle that bordered his backyard, Thomas didn't think much of it. The wooded area served as a nice buffer between his property and the expanding Oakwood Estates subdivision. One spring morning, Thomas was awakened by the sound of heavy machinery. Peering through his kitchen window, he was shocked to see construction crews clearing trees on his inherited land. Racing outside in his bathrobe, Thomas confronted a man in a suit who introduced himself as Gerald Hoffman, president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. "We're building the community pool here," Gerald explained dismissively. "This land has been designated for community use in our development plans." "But this is my property," Thomas protested. "I have the deed right in my house." Gerald smiled condescendingly. "Our records show this parcel belongs to Oakwood Estates. Your concerns have been noted, but the project will continue as scheduled." Thomas stood his ground, the morning dew soaking through his slippers. "You can't just show up and start destroying my property. I'm calling the police." Gerald's smile tightened. "Feel free, Mr. Reeves. Our permits are in order." He gestured toward a worker who handed him a folder. "County-approved development plans. We've been transparent about this project for months. There have been 3 community meetings. Meetings I wasn't invited to because I don't belong to your HOA," Thomas countered, his voice rising. "This land isn't part of Oakwood Estates." By now, several neighbors had emerged from their homes, watching the confrontation from a distance. Thomas recognized a few friendly faces from adjacent properties. People who, like him, had resisted the HOA's attempts to absorb their homes into the development. "Listen, Mr. Reeves," Gerald said, lowering his voice. "This is happening whether you like it or not. The pool will benefit everyone's property values, including yours. We could discuss compensation for any inconvenience at our next board meeting." A bulldozer roared to life behind them, toppling a massive oak tree that Thomas' uncle had often said was over 100 years old. The crack and crash as it fell sent birds scattering into the morning sky. Thomas felt physically ill. "Stop them," he shouted, moving toward the machinery. Gerald placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "I wouldn't interfere with contracted workers, Mr. Reeves. That could be seen as trespassing." "Trespassing? On my own land?" Thomas was incredulous. "That remains to be determined," Gerald replied smoothly. "Now, I suggest you get dressed and consider how you want to proceed. The county office is open at 9 if you'd like to file a complaint. Of course, by then we'll have completed today's scheduled clearing." Thomas looked around helplessly at the rapidly transforming landscape. 3 more trees marked with orange spray paint were next on the crew's list. The wooded sanctuary his uncle had preserved for decades was disappearing before his eyes, and all he had on was a bathrobe and growing sense of desperate fury. Thomas spent the next 24 hours in a state of panic and fury. He contacted his lawyer, Sophia Martinez, who advised him to document everything. Thomas dug through his files and found the deed to the inherited land, property tax records, and a survey conducted 5 years earlier, all confirming his ownership. "They can't just take your land," Sophia assured him over the phone, her voice calm but determined. "But we need to move quickly before they cause irreparable damage." Thomas had barely slept, the constant noise of machinery infiltrating his dreams. He took his coffee to the kitchen window at dawn, horrified to see that the clearing had accelerated overnight. Floodlights illuminated the work area where a second crew had apparently worked through darkness. "They're rushing to create a fait accompli," Sophia explained when he called her again, panic rising in his voice. "It's a tactic. Make changes so substantial that reversing them seems impossible." Armed with his smartphone and the property documents, Thomas walked the perimeter of his land, carefully photographing the boundary markers his uncle had maintained. He captured video of workers referring to site plans, close-ups of equipment emblazoned with "contracted by Oakwood Estates HOA," and the growing pile of timber that had once been his wooded sanctuary. When Thomas attempted to approach the foreman for a statement, a security guard materialized from a parked SUV. "Mr. Hoffman said you might cause trouble," the guard informed him, hand resting casually on his holstered taser. "I'm instructed not to let you near the construction site." "This is my property," Thomas insisted, holding up the deed. "You're the ones trespassing." The guard's expression remained impassive. "Take up with the county, sir. I'm just doing my job." He gestured to the property line. "Please remain on the undisputed portion of your land." By mid-afternoon, Thomas had compiled everything into a detailed chronology. Sophia reviewed his evidence via video call, nodding with increasing confidence. "They overplayed their hand," she said, typing notes as they spoke. "Their permits don't match the actual property lines. We'll file for an emergency injunction today, but I should warn you, it might take days to get before a judge." "Days? They'll have dug half the pool by then." Sophia's expression was sympathetic but realistic. The wheels of justice turn slowly, Thomas, but they do turn. I'm also preparing demands for them to cease and desist immediately. From his living room window, Thomas watched as cement trucks now lined the street. Gerald Hoffman stood with the project manager, both men gesturing enthusiastically at architectural renderings. Several Oakwood Estates residents had gathered to observe the progress, their expressions ranging from excitement to concern. "They're moving at warp speed," Thomas told Sophia during their third call of the day. "It's like they know they're racing against legal action." "They probably are," she replied grimly. "Keep documenting everything." "And Thomas, don't confront them again without me present. People who take shortcuts like this, they rarely stop at just one ethical breach." On day 3 of the construction invasion, Sophia called Thomas with a breakthrough. "My paralegal found something in the county records," she said, excitement evident in her voice. "The HOA filed for permits using property maps from 2005, before your uncle's land was officially rezoned. They're working from outdated boundaries." Thomas leaned forward in his chair. "So they knowingly use old maps." "That's what we need to prove," Sophia replied. "Their permit application included a statement certifying current documentation. Either they were criminally negligent or deliberately deceptive." Thomas spent the afternoon combing through his email archives, searching for any prior contact from the HOA. Finding nothing, he checked his spam folder as a last resort. There, buried among pharmaceutical promotions and fake lottery announcements, were 3 messages from Oakwood Estates HOA dating back 6 months. "I found something," he told Sophia, his voice shaking as he forwarded the emails. The first contained a lowball offer for his uncle's land, less than half its market value. The second was a final notice requesting response to their generous offer. The third, dated just 2 months ago, indicated that due to lack of response, Oakwood Estates will proceed with development plans as outlined in attachment. "This is gold," Sophia said after reviewing the messages. "They didn't just misrepresent to the county, they created a paper trail showing premeditation. They knew exactly whose land they were taking." Thomas paced his living room. "They sent these offers to an email address I barely use, then claimed my silence was consent. How is that even legal?" "It's not," Sophia confirmed, "but they likely figured that by the time you challenged them, the pool would be complete. Easier to ask forgiveness than permission, especially when the forgiveness comes in the form of a lawsuit they could drag out for years." Thomas watched through his window as concrete trucks began pouring the foundation for what would be the pool's pump house. On the far corner of his property, the workers had erected a chain-link fence around the entire construction site, complete with no trespassing signs bearing the Oakwood Estates logo. When Sophia contacted Gerald Hoffman with their findings, his dismissive attitude remained unchanged, though Thomas thought he detected a new note of defensiveness in the HOA president's response. "We have all necessary approvals," Gerald insisted in a terse email. "Mr. Reeves is simply confused about property lines. Our development plans were properly submitted and approved by the county planning department." What Gerald didn't know was that Sophia had already spoken with a sympathetic clerk at the planning department, who was quietly investigating how the misrepresented documents had been approved. "He's getting nervous," Sophia told Thomas that evening. He referenced the planning department specifically, not just the county like before. He knows that's where the paper trail leads. Thomas nodded grimly. "So what's our next move?" "Tomorrow we file the emergency injunction," Sophia answered. "And then we pay Mr. Hoffman a visit with a court reporter present." 3 days into construction, with the pool excavation nearly complete, Thomas received notice that his emergency hearing would happen the following week, potentially too late to prevent significant damage. "Mean to try something else," Thomas told Sophia over the phone. By next week, they'll have poured concrete. "I understand your frustration," Sophia replied, "but confrontation could undermine our legal position." That evening, returning from a grocery run, Thomas noticed unusual activity at the construction site. Work had stopped for the day, but several luxury vehicles were parked along the street. Following the sound of laughter and clinking glasses, he discovered Gerald Hoffman hosting what appeared to be a celebratory gathering at the edge of the massive excavation. Board members in business attire sipped champagne while Gerald proudly gestured at architectural renderings mounted on easels. A banner reading "Oakwood Estates Luxury Pool and Recreation Center, opening July 4th, fluttered in the evening breeze. Something inside Thomas snapped. He drove home, changed into his best suit, and gathered his property documents, the original survey, and printouts of the damning emails. He slid everything into a leather portfolio Sophia had prepared for the upcoming hearing. "Time for a different approach," he muttered, straightening his tie. Thomas marched purposefully toward the gathering, smartphone recording video in his breast pocket. As he approached the chain-link fence, 2 security guards stepped forward. "Sir, this is a private event," the taller one said, hand raised. "On private property," Thomas replied calmly. "My private property." The guard glanced uncertainly at his colleague. Mr. Hoffman said, "Call the police," Thomas announced loudly enough for all to hear. "I'd like them to witness a homeowners association trespassing and destroying private property." A commotion attracted attention. Gerald broke away from his group, face flushed with irritation and champagne. "Mr. Reeves, this is inappropriate," he hissed, approaching the fence. "We could discuss your concerns during business hours." "I tried that approach," Thomas replied, raising his voice so the gathering could hear. "But you seem determined to build your pool on land that doesn't belong to you." Several board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. A woman in a blue blazer frowned and set down her champagne flute. "Gerald, what is he talking about?" she asked. "Nancy, this is that troublemaker I mentioned," Gerald replied dismissively. "He's confused about property lines." Thomas seized the opening. "And you won't mind if I share these documents with everyone? The deed, the property survey, and most interesting, the emails showing your offer to purchase this land. An offer I never accepted." More guests were drifting toward the fence now, curiosity piqued. "Emails." One man asked, brow furrowed. "You told the board his lack of response constituted implicit agreement to our development plan." Phones appeared among the crowd, several now recording the confrontation. Thomas recognized neighbors from adjacent properties joining the growing audience. Gerald's confident demeanor faltered. "This is not the appropriate forum for. What is the appropriate time to stop someone from stealing your property?" Thomas interrupted, its calm voice carrying across the suddenly quiet gathering. "Before or after they pour concrete?" The woman in the blue blazer, Nancy, stepped closer to the fence. "Mr. Reeves, I'm the HOA treasurer. Would you mind showing me those documents?" By midnight, video clips of the confrontation had spread through neighborhood social media groups. By morning, local news vans lined the street outside Thomas's home. HOA builds pool on wrong property flashed across the morning news chyron as Thomas watched from his living room, still stunned by how quickly events had escalated. "Mr. Reeves, did the Homeowners Association know this was your land when they began construction?" asked a reporter when Thomas reluctantly stepped outside. "That's what the evidence suggests," Thomas replied carefully, following Sophia's coaching. "They sent purchase offers that I never accepted, then proceeded anyway." The story gained momentum when Melissa Chen, an investigative reporter for the city's largest news station, began digging into Oakwood Estates' development history. Her research uncovered 3 similar boundary disputes in the past 2 years, all resolved with confidential settlements after construction had already been completed. "This appears to be a pattern," Chen reported that evening. "Begin work quickly, create facts on the ground, and negotiate from a position of strength when property owners complain." County officials, suddenly under public scrutiny, suspended all permits pending investigation. Construction equipment sat idle as yellow caution tape surrounded the massive, muddy pit on Thomas's land. The investigation revealed that the HOA had indeed misrepresented property boundaries on multiple permit applications. "How could this happen?" demanded a county commissioner during an emergency session broadcast live. "Who approved these permits without verifying property lines?" The planning department director shifted uncomfortably. The application included a sworn statement that all boundaries were correct and that property owners had been notified. "We don't typically resurvey for every application." Thomas' emergency injunction hearing, originally scheduled for the following week, was moved up to the next day. Sophia expanded the request to include damages for trespassing, property destruction, and emotional distress. "We have documentation of willful misconduct," she told Thomas as they prepared. They knew exactly what they were doing. As public pressure mounted, the Oakwood Estates HOA board called an emergency meeting. Several members resigned immediately, issuing statements distancing themselves from Gerald's decisions. "We were shown documents indicating the property had been purchased," claimed former board member Nancy Winters, the woman in the blue blazer. "Mr. Hoffman repeatedly assured us everything was properly handled and that Mr. Reeves had agreed to the sale." Gerald Hoffman remained defiant, issuing a statement through his newly hired attorney. Oakwood Estates acted in good faith based on county-approved permits. This unfortunate misunderstanding could have been resolved amicably had Mr. Reeves responded to our communications in a timely manner. The statement backfired spectacularly when Melissa Chen obtained copies of those communications. 3 emails sent to an inactive address with no follow-up by certified mail as required by state law for property transactions. By week's end, the Oakwood Estates community was in turmoil. Residents received notice of a special assessment to cover legal expenses related to the pool project complications, prompting furious reactions at an overflow community meeting. "You told us this project was fully funded and properly permitted," one homeowner shouted at the remaining board members. "Now we're paying for what? Theft." The courtroom fell silent as Judge Eleanor Ramirez delivered her ruling 3 weeks after construction had first begun on Thomas's land. The evidence of willful trespass is overwhelming, she stated, looking directly at Gerald Hoffman, who sat stone-faced beside his attorney. The court not only grants Mr. Reeves' injunction but orders Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association to restore the property to its original condition within 60 days. The judge adjusted her glasses. Additionally, the HOA shall pay substantial damages for the destruction of protected old-growth trees that were removed, trees that, according to the county arborist, were between 75 and 120 years old and irreplaceable. The total cost of restoration and damages was estimated at 3 times what the pool construction would have cost. The HOA's insurance company immediately initiated their own investigation, citing potential fraudulent representation in their policy application. Gerald Hoffman resigned in disgrace the following day after internal HOA documents were leaked showing he had deliberately missold both the board and county officials. The leaked emails revealed Gerald owned a significant stake in the construction company awarded the pool contract, a clear conflict of interest he had never disclosed. Criminal charges for fraud and document falsification followed, with the district attorney citing a blatant abuse of position and trust. The homeowners of Oakwood Estates faced special assessments to cover the legal expenses, restoration costs, and settlement with Thomas, leading many to question the HOA's governance structure and transparency. A reform movement swept through the next board election, with new bylaws requiring multiple bids for major projects and verification of all property acquisitions by independent attorneys. Thomas, suddenly in possession of a significant settlement, found himself with a difficult decision regarding the damaged property. The excavation had destroyed most of the natural features his uncle had cherished. "What are you going to do with it?" Sophia asked as they walked the muddy perimeter once the construction equipment had been removed. Thomas gestured toward the adjacent properties. "My uncle always said this land should be enjoyed by everyone, not just a privileged few behind a fence." 6 months later, Thomas used part of his settlement to create a small nature preserve on his previously wooded land. Working with a conservation architect, he transformed the former construction site into a natural sanctuary with native trees, wildflower meadows, and walking trails open to all neighbors, including those from Oakwood Estates. A commemorative plaque dedicated the preserve to his uncle, whose foresight in maintaining clear property records had ultimately saved the land from being paved over. The preserve became a community gathering place that brought residents together far more effectively than the planned pool ever would have. Children from across all the neighboring developments played on natural climbing structures while their parents chatted on benches beneath young oak trees, saplings that would someday grow as tall as those that had been lost. "Sometimes justice takes time," Thomas reflected to Melissa Chen during a 1-year anniversary feature about the preserve. "But when people stand up for what's right and the community comes together, the outcome can be even better than expected." As he spoke, a group of Oakwood Estates residents, including Nancy Winters, now the HOA president, arrived with native plant donations for the spring planting day, all wearing t-shirts reading "Better Together." No fences, no boundaries.